Hi, everyone, and welcome back to this next lesson in the Private Pilot Online Ground School. My name is Micah Small. I'm your CFI, and I'm going to be guiding you through the taxiing, airport signs, and lighting lesson today. Let's take a brief look at the overview. The what? Controlled movement of the airplane under its own power while on the ground. The why? Since the airplane is moved by its own power, the pilot must thoroughly understand and be proficient in taxi procedures. The content we're covering today: taxiway instructions, plan, review, and brief, taxiing, wind correction, taxi checks, avoiding aircraft and hazards, avoiding incursions, and light gun signals. So the taxi instructions on a controlled airport. First off, communication with ATC. Use standard ATC phraseology. Who you are, where you are, and what you want. Focus on the ATC clearance, record and read back all clearances, and then verify that route and clearance on the taxi diagram. If you are confused for any reason, stop and call back ATC and talk to them and get clarification on what you need to be doing for them, okay? So in a controlled airport, clearance is required to taxi onto a movement area, to taxi onto a runway, and prior to crossing any runway. Okay, prior to entering the movement area, contact ground for taxi instructions. Make sure you know the frequencies and procedures. You can find them in the chart supplement, and then the airport diagram and NOTAMs. You should be aware of all of that stuff. So the initial taxi request is going to be the aircraft identification, the location, the type of operation, and the first point of intended landing. All right. So at an uncontrolled airport, planning, be familiar with the local procedures, the runway use, the traffic patterns, etc. Okay? Announce your location and intentions on the CTAF. Monitor and communicate on CTAF from the engine start until 10 miles from the airport. Okay? Maintain your situational awareness. Be aware of your route, your location, and the location of other aircraft in the vicinity. Not all aircraft are radio equipped, so make sure you are visually clearing the area vigilantly. Your route planning, just build a general idea of the airport layout and a likely route. Use your current references like the airport diagram and chart supplements, other expected routes, and take a look at the hotspots on the airfield, which we will talk about in later lessons as well, but that's just busy spots where things could happen, okay? Review those NOTAMs for taxiway changes and or closures, and review any pre-designated or standard taxi routes that might be available. Make sure that you brief all passengers. We use the FAA's acronym SAFETY for this. And that is just like the word is spelled, and it's for seatbelts and shoulder harnesses, air vents and environmental, fire extinguishers, emergencies and exits, traffic and talking, and your questions. And that's a briefing we give to the passengers every time we fly. And then your technical information on the pilot side of that is just going to be verifying your fuel planning and loading, any equipment issues or discrepancies before you take off, applicable NOTAMs, expected runway routes and plans, critical locations, and any other pertinent information for that flight. We're going to record and review when we request our taxi clearance. And that just means that we're going to write down their instructions after we make our request, and then we're going to review that route and ask for help or clarification if confused. The benefits of recording that down on paper or your iPad: it prevents mistakes and forgetfulness, and then it combats any expectation bias. The benefits of reviewing then is increasing situational awareness, okay, and spatial awareness. It clarifies any confusion prior to your movement, and it helps keep your focus outside then during the taxi. So the appropriate flight deck activities while taxiing: head down activities should be done when stopped and the brake is set to keep your workload at a minimum during the actual taxi. Sterile cockpit taxi is a critical phase of flight, so you need to practice the sterile cockpit rule from taxi through the climb out until you get to cruise climb. So taxiing near other aircraft is what we call a continuous loop process, and that's just to monitor and update progressions and locations, and being clear and understanding all of your clearances and staying vigilant for call signs that might be similar to yours, but also for other traffic in the area. So the steering is very easy in an airplane. It is not with the control wheel or the yoke. Like in a car, it's accomplished with using the rudder pedals and sometimes the brakes with differential braking. So rudder pedals are used for normal turns, and then braking in the direction of the turn can assist in turning if you need to turn around at a sharper diameter, sharper radius. Okay. Taxi at the speed of a fast or brisk walk. Speed is controlled with first with the power and then with brake pressure, but do not ride the brakes. It's not good for them. Okay. And then your centerline sight picture. Just keep that centerline between your outside leg and the stick or yoke bar, and adjust as necessary for different aircraft or seat positions in that aircraft. Brake check. Test the brakes as soon as the plane starts moving. Shut the engine down immediately if the brakes are not working. And on your taxi check, look at the attitude indicator. No more than 5 degrees of pitch or bank when you accelerate, decelerate, or turn left or right. And then the turn and slip indicator. The wings should turn with the turn and the ball should turn opposite the turn. And make sure that the inclinometer or that ball is full of fluid, and when you start, that ball is between the cage marks. The compass and heading indicator moving toward and indicating known headings, and then the compass shouldn't have any cracks, leaks, or bubbles. So then the aircraft lighting. Before you start the engine, throw that beacon on, and then prior to taxiing, you have your navigation lights, position lights, and anti-collision lights on. And then before you're moving or intending to move, taxi light on. Okay, if you're stopped or yielding, then the taxi light goes off. Be cognizant of strobe lights that affect and their effect on other pilots. Okay, so we don't want to blind somebody with our strobe. So if you're going to be close to somebody else, you can leave your position lights on, but you can turn the strobes off so you don't blind anybody. And then if you're crossing a runway, all the lights are required to be on while you cross that runway. Okay, takeoff, entering a runway, all lights on except for the landing light. And then takeoff clearance or starting your takeoff roll, then the landing lights are now on as well. All right, talking about wind correction now, we're going to recognize the wind direction as recorded from ATIS, ASOS, AWOS, Air Traffic Control, or Flight Service. And the wind indicators can also be a windsock, a wind cone, a tetrahedron, a wind T, or then just wind blowing across water, tall grass, smokestacks, etc. So use the heading indicator and heading bug to visualize the wind in relation to the airplane. And then taxiing with the wind, keep your engine power at a minimum and apply brakes occasionally to prevent overheating them. If you are taxiing into a quartering headwind, keep the elevator neutral, and then the ailerons, you're going to turn into the wind. And with a quartering tailwind, keep that elevator down, and then the ailerons will be with the wind. Night operations. Now, there's a lot of differences to night operations, so we'll dig into that a little bit here. So the exterior lights, obviously, are going to make that aircraft easier to see. So on the runway, line up within 3 feet of 3 feet off the center line to enable other aircraft to differentiate you from the runway lights. So, I mean, basically just make sure that you're on the center line, but if they have a lighted center line, just be off it a little bit just so people can recognize that you are different than the runway lights, okay? Be more cautious. Reduced visibility makes taxiing more difficult. Ensure the assigned route and look closely for markings. And, of course, taxi slower. I mean, we should drive slower at night. We should taxi slower at night, too. Allow ample time to stop if something suddenly appears in front of the plane. I fly out of the Midwest, and we do have critters around here that sometimes want to be on the runway, like deer. In Minnesota, they could have some bears. Sometimes we get larger birds or turkeys. So just be mindful and pay attention and taxi a little slower at night so you have time to pump the brakes, okay? Focus your entire attention on the safe operation of the aircraft while it's moving. That goes without saying. This should be all the time, but especially when we have low visibility, okay? So again, taxi slowly. Keep your eyes outside. Practice that sterile cockpit rule and withhold any checklists and nonsensical communication unless you're at a stop, okay? Notify the controller of any difficulties immediately, and lack of tower visibility, so they have a hard time seeing at night too sometimes. Lack of their visibility can prevent confirmation of adherence to taxi instructions, so just make sure you're openly communicating because everybody has difficulty at night. So for runway incursions now, let's talk about these. So We don't want a runway incursion. That's a bad thing, and we definitely don't want any incidents or accidents. So we have to be mindful. So taxi first with our eyes outside, practice the sterile cockpit rule, and stop in the case of emergency. Okay? Maintain your situational awareness. Know where you are and where you're going, and build a mental picture of other traffic. Okay? The big one is write down the taxi instructions and read back all crossing and hold short instructions. Sometimes this sounds like it could get tedious, but it's all for safety. Okay? So be conservative. Taxi at the speed of a fast or brisk walk, and of course, give way when necessary. Ask if you have any route and or runway changes. Ask for a safe place to stop. Copy the new taxi instructions and review the route. Request a progressive taxi if you need to. And then looking at the hold lines, approach from the dash side, cross, and stop fully past the solid lines. Approaching from the solid line side, don't cross without a clearance. Okay. Landing and rollout. Brief the landing and the rollout procedure that you're planning on doing. Okay, ensure the entire aircraft has cleared the hold short line. And then if you're between parallel runways, only cross when cleared to cross. So again, here on the left-hand side, the two on the right really don't necessarily pertain to visual flight rules, but you do at least need to understand and see the differences in the runways. So let's look at the notes here, read through those, and then you can pause the video and study that graphic a little more if you need time to do that. So first note, required on runways serving Category Charlie and Delta aircraft for runways intended for international and commercial air transport. Okay. And then and these notes correspond to the graphic as well. Note number 2 is required on 4,200 feet or longer runways serving in categories Charlie and Delta airplanes. And then the note 3 down there says it's required on 42-foot or longer instrumented runways. And then note 4 on the graphic is used when the full runway pavement width may not be available for use as a runway. So that just tells you the landing designator, center lines, thresholds, aiming points, touchdown zones, and edge markings in coordination with these notes and what aircraft fly there. So we're about halfway through this lesson. It's not a super long one, but there's a lot of important information in here. So hopefully you're taking time to take some notes down and really focus on remembering this information. Okay, let's look at these runways now. You can study this graphic. Again, we won't stay on here too long. I just want you to be familiar with the designators that are on there, like centerline markings, aiming point markings, touchdown zone markers, side stripes, shoulder markings, threshold markings, and then any blast pads or stopway areas. So really study this graphic, and you can even see the runway width down there tells you by the number of stripes how wide that runway is going to be as well. So not something you have to memorize, but it's something that can hurt you if you don't at least have the ability to understand these things. All right, again, now we will power through these pretty quickly, but you could pause the video and study them if you want to. So we're just a brief look at what centerline markings, shoulder markings, location signs, edge markings, direction signs, and position markings might look like on an airfield. The holding position shows where the aircraft is supposed to stop when approaching a runway. So it'll have holding position markings on the taxiways and on the runways. And then the taxiway is located in the runway approach area and the surface painted holding position areas as well. So you can look there at the numbers and see what all of those look like. Other airport markings that you might see is a VOR checkpoint. You're going to see something that looks similar to that, and you can read the 5 bullet points there. That'll tell you what colors and everything that's going to be and how you need to be aligned. Vehicle roadways then, of course, you'll see there, and there's no airplane traffic on those at all. You'll also have a non-movement boundary area, which both lines are yellow. It's a single dashed line and a single solid line, and that's between the movement side and the non-movement side for where you need or don't need clearance to move around. And then if you're approaching an airfield or runway that has a big white X on it, that runway is closed and not used for landing at all anymore. So to notate or denote the entrance to runways or critical areas or areas where aircrafts are prohibited, you're going to see these runway hold position signs, and it just tells you that 23 goes to the right diagonally, 5 goes to the left diagonally. So if you're coming up on a diagonal taxiway like that, runway like that, you know which direction it goes. Same with 9 and 27, okay? If you're getting to a runway approach where you need to hold at a runway approach, that would be that sign down there saying that you're coming up to the approach area for 15 and you have to hold there. The ILS critical area hold position is where you're going to want to stop so that you don't interfere with any planes landing on that ILS approach for any runways. And then finally, that no entry sign there, that is actually denoting that, yes, it might look like a road or taxiway, but it's only available for ground vehicles. Aircraft are not allowed to taxi in there. So taxiway location sign just tells you, hey, you are on taxiway T or Tango. Your runway boundary sign, again, that's that stop and hold short line. And that says, hey, don't cross the double yellow or the double black line if you're on the one side, or the double dashed. You can cross because that's leaving the runway. So the taxiway would be on the double line side, and the runway would be on the dashed side. Runway location sign, if you see that, it tells you you are on runway 15. And then the ILS critical area boundary sign, that ladder just means stop here, and that's where you're going to see that red ILS sign. So these are the markings painted on the ground on the right, and then on the left is going to be your signs on the side. So this one is an intersection. Basically, it tells you that you see the black one with the yellow letters. It tells you where you're at, and then any of those directions you turn is going to get on those other taxiways. If you are on a taxiway and you see the yellow sign with an A that says to the right, that means you're going to be able to turn onto taxiway Alpha. All right, so the airport signs then, destination information. Destination, of course, is going to tell you runways, aprons, terminals, military areas, civilian areas, cargo areas, international areas, and then FBOs. And then the information provided like that would be areas the tower can't see, and radio frequencies or noise abatement procedures, etc. The black sign with a white 3 on it in this instance, that informs pilots the distance remaining on that runway is 3,000 feet. So you'll see a 3, a 2, a 1, and that's just how much you have left on your runway. And it depends on the overall length of the runway, how high the numbers will get for you to read. Again, here, just take a brief moment to pause this slide and just study what all of those look like and where they're at on the airfield. All right, so now on your taxiways, the taxiway edge lights, they're going to outline the edges of the taxiways, especially at night. Obviously, you're going to see the lights better, or with restricted visibility, etc. But the taxiway is always going to be blue lights. If you do have centerline lights on a taxiway, those are going to be steady green lights, and they'll just be along that center line. And then any clearance bar lights that you're looking for are going to increase the visibility of a holding position in low vis or indicate the location of an intersecting taxiway. And those are going to be 3 in the pavement lights that are yellow in color and steady. So it looks like it's yellow on one side and black on the other there. That's because coming off the other direction, you're not going to see any light, but going onto that taxiway, you would see the yellow. And then runway guard lights. They enhance the visibility of taxiway and runway intersections. They're in a row of in-pavement yellow lights across the taxiway or elevated flashing yellow lights on each side of the taxiway. All right, and then you have your stop bar configuration and lights. So there's a row of red steady in-pavement lights across the entire taxiway, and they're elevated lights on either side of the taxiway. And that's just when you need to be mindful and stop. It's exactly what it says, what it sounds like. So then the runway edge lights now, they outline the edge of the runways. Runways always have white lights. Instrument runways switch to yellow lights for the last 2,000 feet or half if it's shorter, whichever is shorter. The lights marking the end of the runway are red towards the runway and green toward the threshold. So it's green where the runway starts and it's red where the runway ends. And then classified on brightness, you could set the lights, or in a controlled field, they'll set them for you and you can ask them how you want them. And in an uncontrolled field, you can set them with your radio, and you can set for high intensity, medium intensity, or low intensity. All right, the rails or runway end identifier lights provide a rapid positive identification of the approach end of the runway. It's a pair of synchronized flashing lights located on each side of the runway as well. And it just helps you identify the end of the runway. And then in between the rails, you should generally see those runway threshold lights as well. All right, runway centerline lighting system, the RCLS, it's installed on some precision runways to facilitate landing in adverse conditions. They're white lights, except the last 3,000 feet, they alternate red and white, and the last 1,000 feet are all red. So touchdown zone lights, it's used on some precision runways to indicate the touchdown zone, and again, it's designed for adverse visibility. Taxiway centerline, lead on and lead off lights, visual guidance to enter and exit the runway, alternating green and yellow lights from the centerline to one light beyond the hold position. It just helps you see at night a little bit better, okay? Land and hold short lights, used to indicate the hold short point on the runways approved for lasso operations. It's a row of pulsating white lights installed across the runway. All right, so the pilot control the lighting then. Operation is controlled by the tower or flight service at a controlled airport. Pilots can request they're turned on, off, dimmed, etc. But the pilot control of lighting in an uncontrolled field is just a radio control of the lighting, and it's available at some non-towered airports. You key the microphone on a specific frequency, okay? So the frequency is generally the CTAF, and it's in the chart supplement. So you key the mic, usually within 5 seconds. 3 times is lowest intensity, 5 times is medium intensity, 7 times is highest intensity. So it's just dim, mid brightness, and then high brightness, basically. Okay, that pretty much sums it up for this lesson. If you have any questions, again, drop them in the comments below. If I am your flight instructor in person, you can ask me the next time we're together. If I'm not, go ahead and ask your flight instructor, because again, we'll always be happy to help you achieve your goals and to be the safest pilot you can be. Like I say at the end of every one of these videos, thanks for joining us on this short flight, and be safe out there.